It just comes back to this word balance.
It's so true. It has to be lived through. I just love your story, and I'm grateful for you sharing it.
My number one priority.
And that is so cool.
You have to do a lot of self-reflection and a lot of work on yourself.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautifully said. Welcome back to I Can Fit That In. Today's guest has lived through the extreme highs of global success and the deep lows of identity loss, mental health struggles, and the long road back to himself. Ryan Dusick is the founding drummer of Maroon 5, a licensed therapist, speaker, coach, and the author of the powerful memoir, Harder to Breathe, a memoir of making Maroon 5, losing it all, and finding recovery. He's also the host of the Harder to Breathe podcast, where he shares real stories of struggle, healing, and hope. Starting the group Kara's Flowers in 1994 with best friends Adam Levine, Jesse Carmichael, and Mickey Madden, Ryan and his bandmates worked tirelessly for over a decade before the group changed its name to Maroon 5 and finally recorded its first multi-platinum album, Songs About Jane. They rose to international fame, selling over 20 million albums and winning 2 Grammys. Yet, Ryan's world began to unravel as he found himself suffering and without direction when his career as a performer came to an end. Behind the scenes, he was battling anxiety, physical breakdown, and eventually alcoholism, but his story did not end there. In 2016, Ryan began a new journey, one of recovery, reflection, and ultimately reinvention. He earned a master's degree from Pepperdine University in clinical psychology, became a licensed therapist, and turned his pain into purpose. Today, Ryan is using his talents in an entirely new way. He's helping others heal and reminding us all that even when everything falls apart, something meaningful can still be built from those pieces. This conversation is about identity, recovery, and the power of telling the truth and what it really means to find your rhythm again. So let's dive in. Ryan, welcome.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, well, as a Maroon 5 fan, I've been to concerts, in the past, and huge fan. And so I'm really excited for this conversation also because I too have experienced that loss of purpose and that loss of sense of self. And in a different way, I was on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs and burned out from that high performance. So I'm really interested in sharing your story with my audience because you know high performance at a whole other level than the corporate world. And yet, not everyone will be in a rock band or have international fame in that way. And most people, like you and me, that experience that loss of identity, don't necessarily know how to get themselves back up. They don't necessarily know what recovery means or how to live a life of purpose or even find that sense of self. So let's just kind of start with your journey and what you would like people to know about how that was for you, that experience of loss of identity and finding purpose again.
Well, it was, I feel like I've lived 4 lifetimes already, so it's hard to encapsulate in a short soundbite, but I'll do my best.
Yeah.
I think that, the band for me was my purpose and identity in life from a very early age. It was the thing that I identified as my, sense of self, the thing that gave me self-esteem, self-worth, drive and ambition, and just a focus on what was meaningful to me. Music was everything to me. My bandmates were everything to me. The things we were trying to accomplish since we were in high school were the reason I had, ambition and drive in the world. And so it was my entire world, not just in terms of career, but in terms of my entire social sphere. The band and all of my friends connected to the band were my sense of connection and community. And the music that we made was my sense of creativity and expression, and the way that we worked together, was teamwork and collaboration. And all of these things were deeply meaningful and fulfilling and purposeful for me up until the point when I couldn't perform anymore, which was due to first physical problems I was having on the road as a performer, as a drummer, joint problems, nerve problems. Looking back now, I understand that it was largely psychological as well. There was a lot of anxiety that I took into that place where, I put internal pressure on myself, perfectionism, and then all of a sudden I'm dealing with the highest level of pressure of performance. And that's when the imposter syndrome comes in, and the self-doubt, and the sort of the trauma of having to perform through all these feelings that this is going to end badly for me, which eventually it did. And so walking away from the band right at the peak of our success after a decade of building to that was devastating to me. It was heartbreaking. It was a loss of everything I just described: my purpose, my identity, my connection, community. And I had to go through a grieving process. I'd like to say that it happened quickly, that I turned the page and just found new purpose and identity immediately. But I really did have to go through a whole process that lasted almost a decade, really. Looking back now, I wish I knew then what I know now, because it would have helped me speed that process along. But we learn our lessons in our own time. And I wasn't really ready until I was ready. And it was the moment when I found sobriety, and when I kind of started to really take therapy seriously, and began to volunteer and be of service to others. That was the new sense of identity and purpose that I found in the recovery community. And so I'm just going to keep doing that. That led to me going back to school to get a master's degree in clinical psychology, to become, originally I thought, a drug counselor, but then I just became a therapist. That led to me writing the book Harder to Breathe while I was in grad school, which then opened the door for advocacy, for having a platform, a public platform, to talk about mental health and psychology and wellness. And so what started as volunteering at a recovery center ended up with me being a professional clinician and an advocate and a speaker, getting on stages and talking about mental health, working with people in the music industry and high performers outside of the music industry. I have therapy clients, coaching clients. I speak to at events and with organizations geared towards helping, dealing with the needs of the people who are performing at the highest level, because I can relate to those people, and hopefully they can relate to me given my background.
I mean, it's such a powerful story in so many ways. And one of the things that you said early in sharing your story just now really resonated with me. You were talking about when you were on these global stages and you were performing, and you had this anxiety, these nerves, these reactions essentially to what was playing out in your own mind. And a lot of that in your own mind, and you know this from a clinical perspective, it's false. It's just a false narrative. No, it's not real. And yet you imagine or you believe that eventually the shoe's going to drop, and you're either going to lose it all or something bad is going to happen. And then sure enough, if that manifests, and it does. And it's like, well, I told myself this was going to happen. Some of my listeners know my story of being on a plane to Bali, going on a retreat, and literally fainting twice in the airplane, like somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. And it was because I had worked myself up so much through burnout and through being everything to everyone and performing at the highest levels in the corporate world, and then just literally collapsing. And for me, I believed that was a mindset shift. And it was like my life was being reoriented. And I didn't know how it was happening, but it was there in front of me taking place. That's exactly what you just described. And if you were to say to people who are listening, who maybe have this imposter syndrome in their mind, have this belief in themselves that something bad has to happen because life can't be this good. Or, I can't just have what I have or achieve what I have and not have something bad happen. What would you say to those people who maybe think that way?
Well, I think if you're in that room or you're on that stage, you're in that arena, whatever the arena may be, you belong there. There's a reason why you're there. Now, you might have fooled a few people along the way. You might have talked a big game and you haven't really learned all the rules, which I hadn't. I got to the level and I barely even ever took a drum lesson. So that was part of it, feeling like I wasn't prepared. But if you're there, there's a reason why you're there. I know that's hard to believe when you feel like an imposter, but on some level, you didn't get to that place if you didn't have some ability to put yourself in that place. Right. Now, at the same time, when challenges come along, and things become difficult and you realize how much you don't know, or how many skills you're lacking, or how many things you've yet to conquer in terms of becoming really comfortable and confident in that space, that just means you have more to learn. And that gives you a challenge, which can either be something that sets you back or something that propels you forward if you're willing to learn and grow from it. Every challenge, every setback, of course, is an opportunity to learn and grow. That was really the biggest challenge for me because I was so young when I went into the music industry, a little naive in terms of just thinking, well, we got signed to a record deal, we're going to make an album, we're going to be huge, and that's it. It's all fun. It's just a big party, and not realizing that there's a lot of work along the way and that you have to be ready to take on challenges and learn and grow. I was a kid who had the sort of pride of youth. And so with that came defensiveness. When there were things that I realized I wasn't good at, I kind of rejected them or ran away from them for fear of looking like I wasn't good enough or that I would fail. And that didn't allow me to learn and find new skills in a way that I could have, that would have better prepared me for the challenges that would come. And then when those challenges came, to overcome them. So, I think that you have to expect that even when you're performing at the highest level, there are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be things that come along that you don't know yet or that you're not good at yet. And the difference between being a perfectionist, as I was, where you're thinking, well, I have to be perfect right out of the gate, otherwise I'm a failure. There's only those two options. Striving for excellence is admitting when you don't have all the answers or you don't have all the skills, and using that to propel you forward to more greatness and more excellence. That's the difference that I like to take. That's the shift that I've made in my mindset. I can't really completely get rid of my perfectionism because it's part of my nature, but I can use it to my advantage and not to my detriment by just striving for excellence and realizing that failure is going to be part of the process that eventually propels me to excellence.
I love that so much. And it's also, I think what's really interesting about that is that sometimes, life is what happens while you're busy making plans for the life you think you're going to live. Mm-hmm. And we're all taught in our society and our culture that we are supposed to follow a linear path. And your linear path just happened to look like, hey, I'm going to be in a band and we're going to be really good. And then it's going to, take us to some fame. And eventually life says, well, actually, you've done that for some time, but we've got other plans for you. And so much of what I feel is so inspiring about your story is that you don't have this victimhood mindset of like, look where I was and what I did, and then it got taken from me. And rather you turned that into an opportunity in your life to allow life to happen through you and for you, and not, to be a victim to what happened to you. Right. And I think that those are the stories that are the most inspiring. Those are the stories that serve others. Those are the stories that then allow you to authentically be yourself on stages and be yourself with your clients and to help others flourish and thrive in their own lives, which is just, to me, the greatest purpose on this planet. Right. Mm-hmm. So what would you say are the rituals in your life, the things that you fit in that matter most to you and that you will not let anyone, even your own mind, talk you out of?
Well, one of the benefits of going through addiction recovery, and I see this with a lot of the people in that community, we gain certain tools and skills that if you never have to go through that process, you never would have gained. And while no one wants to, have to go to those lows in order to attain those skills, there's a silver lining that comes with it. I really do think that we have an advantage having because you get sober and you work on yourself and you do it in order to just live and get back to life. But in the process, you have to do a lot of self-reflection and a lot of work on yourself in your relationships, in your behaviors, in your mindset, in your emotional world. And it's a holistic sort of approach to living a better life that really benefits you far beyond, just staying sober. So for me, I improved my diet. I improved, I exercise more. I'm more social. I don't isolate as much, which used to be a problem for me. Self-care in a general sense has to be my number one priority. Because if I'm not taking care of myself, then all of the other things I just described kind of fall apart. I'm not going to be as good in my work. I'm not going to be as good in being of service to others. I'm not going to show up in my relationships well. I'm not going to have as much energy and focus in the things that I enjoy. I'm not going to enjoy them as much. So self-care is number one. And that means prioritizing sleep, because that's fundamental to everything. You know, if you are well rested, you're going to be at a much better starting point. Fostering my inner child on a weekly, if not daily basis is important to me. I play softball every weekend. It's more than just exercise. It's a way of connecting to a part of me that is innocent and joyful. And then through my day, it's finding a balance. Balance is a big word in my life. Finding a balance between the things that feel like hard work and purposeful in that regard, and feeling that I'm doing something that is worth doing. Mm-hmm. That I feel a sense of purpose in the things that I'm doing, but also balancing that with this is a hard one for me. This is a really hard one for me. Slowing down and just being present, and sometimes realizing the most productive thing I can do is to just rest and just feel comfortable in my body. Because being ambitious, being a perfectionist by nature, being somebody that wants to feel like everything I'm doing is purposeful, oftentimes I feel like I'm being lazy if I'm not doing that 24/7. But the opposite is true. If you're doing that 24/7, you're not recuperating and you're not filling up your cup. So you're not as effective at the things you're doing. So you have to take that time. If you're working 9 to 5 and you're well rested and you've connected to the people in your life and the things that bring you joy, and then you're in that workspace and you're giving 100%, you're going to be that much more effective than if you're working 20 hours and you haven't done all of those things, and you're going to enjoy it more in the process. Right?
Oh, it's so true. And I think you also get very clear on where you're being drained as well as a part of that process, because the more that you are filling yourself up, you're practicing that self-care, you're giving yourself that rest, you're being more intentional with where you're giving of yourself in the external world, you're also going to notice where you're being pulled from and drained. I call it like energy leaks. And
sure.
It's really important to notice who and what environments drain you, because this is something I learned, and I know a lot of my clients have learned, and a lot of my audience knows this, but when you are being drained by a person, a place, or an activity, and you're not conscious of it, you end up irritable, you end up frustrated, ultimately angry, and the whole time you're just completely exhausted, right? And you're going, why am I so exhausted? I've been sleeping okay. Well, even if you're going to bed at 9 p.m. and getting up at 6, yeah, that's enough sleep. But where are you literally just giving away your power and your energy all day long? And I think that self-care has to keep that in mind. So I like to talk about it like, take out the things that don't serve you, put in the things that do, right?
Sure.
That's going to be relationships. That's going to be activities. That's going to be rest and all the holistic things that you just talked about, and how you care for yourself. How do you ultimately protect your own peace, your inner peace? What would you say is your number one practice for doing that?
Well, I'd like to make a point on something you just said that's connected, and I think I'll answer your question in the process. There's a lot of talk about, people that drain you, and avoiding those kinds of relationships or cutting those people out of your life. The important thing to remember is that every time you open yourself up emotionally, it's just like anything else. It takes energy. It's going to drain you to some extent, even if it's a positive experience. So it's a matter of balance. Obviously, if you recognize that somebody in your life is a toxic person, it's not worth your time to try to exert all that energy to try to fix something that's never going to be fixed. However, for instance, being a therapist, the work that I do is very intense, very taxing work. It's mentally taxing because you have to be very focused. It's not like any other office job where you can tune out for half an hour and, scroll through your phone or whatever. You have to be very present with your clients when you're in session, and you're listening to everything they're saying. You're having to use your memory, use your organizational skills in terms of creating some kind of narrative around what they're telling you that's going to turn into a formulation. of this client. And then you're thinking about what feedback you might give, when the timing is for that, all the while checking in with yourself. What's going on with me right now? Why am I responding to this in this way? Am I biased in some way? How can I be more objective? How can I be more emotionally present? Now, you do that 5, 6, 7 hours in a day. No matter how great your clients are, you're going to be drained.
Yeah.
Your brain is going to be tired. You're going to be emotionally exhausted from being, holding space for people that are going through something painful or intense. And so it's both the most fulfilling and purposeful thing that I do with my time, and it gets me out of my self-obsession, to be of service to others, but it also is very taxing. And so it's ultra important for people like therapists and people that are giving of themselves a lot of their time to recognize that you need to balance that with me things. I need to spend time with myself and do the things that foster a sense that I matter, that not all of my energy needs to go towards helping others. So it depends on what you do for a living. It depends on how you're oriented. But everything you do can be taxing. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing that you have to cut out of your life. It just comes back to this word balance that is so important, which means something different to everyone, depending on what your life looks like. But for me, it's because so much of my time is occupied with serious, heavy conversations, with having to be very emotionally available, and engaged in a intellectual as well as emotional way. I come home from work and I feel like, okay, I deserve to just kind of tune out and watch something stupid for a while that just makes me laugh. I don't need more stimulation at that point of my day.
Right.
I've had a lot of it. So figuring out where that balance is for you, what can give you a feeling that you're not burning the candle at both ends. But that doesn't mean that you don't burn the candle anywhere. It just means you have to balance it out.
Yeah, great, really, really good points. And definitely you answered that question very well. I am so curious. I know you talked about the inner child and how you play softball, and that's a way of really connecting with that part of yourself that is playful. And you're right. I mean, so many people as adults just completely forget about that aspect of themselves. I'm raising young boys, they're almost 10 and 11. And I always say I'm raising boys to great men. One of the things I really drive home for them is I never want them to lose their sense of creativity. Mm-hmm. So whether they're writing in a journal, which is creative, it's just letting things flow from your mind. They are, drawing, they're painting, they're just playing Legos, like whatever it is, music. I don't want them to lose the creative side of them, because I believe that is also what really connects us to that inner child, to that sense of playfulness. So for you, there's softball. Is there anything else that you do? Do you still play drums? Like, is there anything else that you do to tap into that creative side of you?
Yeah, I mean, my workspace here is filled with instruments, all of the instruments I've collected over my lifetime, and the drums, are is the one space in my life where there's still a lot of baggage, So it's not a purely joyful thing anymore for me, because of some of the physical issues I've had and just all of the trauma connected to it. So that's still part of my journey I'm working on, but I do play the drums occasionally. I play guitar more often. I sing. I go to the gym. For creativity, writing the book honestly was the most fulfilling creative thing I've done since I left the band, and maybe my entire life. I mean, writing a book is a whole other level in terms of giving of yourself and expressing what's inside of you. Being in the band, I was one of 4 and then 5 members of a band. I didn't write the lyrics. Adam wrote the lyrics. So I was a part of the creative process, but it was collaborative. We had a central, main songwriter. Writing a book, it was my life. It was a process that from the start to the very end was entirely me. So in a lot of ways, that was therapy. It was artistry. It was expression and creativity. So I'm looking for ways to continue to be creative on that level. Since the book, as I've been out promoting and stuff, everyone told me I needed a podcast. So I started my own podcast, the Harder to Breathe podcast. It's also, I have a co-host who's an actor and he's a funny guy. And he kind of plays the role of the layperson, whereas I'm the therapist. And so we try to have fun, although we have a lot of really heavy, serious conversations. That is another way that I connect to that playful side of myself as well. So, so I do that, even though, everyone has a podcast these days, right? But it's fun. It's both. It serves a purpose. It's advocacy, but it's also fun for me, and it is creative. So that's a big aspect of that. But I do look forward to writing more. I think that's probably going to be my main thing.
Yeah. No, I think it's so true. I mean, sometimes people do think of creativity like it has to be art or music. It's like, no, it could be literally just, you can write and not even write for anybody but yourself. And that's okay. That's a creative outlet. And you're right. Podcasting is absolutely creative. I mean, every time you turn on your studio, you are in a creative mode and you're pulling from your mind and you're connecting and relating. And like, there's so much creativity in all of that. One of the things that comes up for me in hearing you talk about your book and your podcast is, tell my listeners, when you talk about Harder to Breathe, what does that ultimately mean? I mean, obviously we all know the song, but what does it really mean? Like, what are you really hoping that they understand about time, healing, energy, intention? What is it that your message is ultimately giving them?
Well, I chose the name Harder to Breathe for the book before I started writing a word of the book. It started out with thinking back to when I first experienced anxiety myself. I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know that what I was experiencing was anxiety. I was just in high school, kind of a shy kid. What I would feel physically a lot of the time, just walking around campus, was this lump in my throat, this tightness in my chest, and then this feeling that like I almost couldn't catch my breath. Looking back, it was definitely anxiety. But I remember thinking to myself, am I the only person who feels this way? Is everyone else walking around feeling this way? I think I'm the only one. So that was very lonely, and it made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Now, fast forward to 8 years later, or whatever it was, with the band on our second record deal. We already had one failed album. We were getting ready to make the album that became Songs About Jane, and we were under a lot of pressure. We had signed with a new label, and we knew this was kind of our last shot. We weren't going to get a third record deal. And we thought we had all the songs to go into the studio and record this album. We thought we had the first single, we had all this stuff, but the record label, as record labels do, kept breathing down our throats, saying, we want to hear you just write a few more songs. We'd love to have just that one song that's really the kickoff to the album. So just to appease them, we went into a rehearsal studio one weekend and wrote 3 songs. They were just kind of pieces of songs that had been laying around, and we just threw them together. But for some reason, something magical happened, and we wrote the song Harder to Breathe and This Love, the first 2 songs on Songs About Jane, and the first 2 singles, and our first 2 hits. It's either ironic or totally fitting that was our first single and the song that propelled us to eventual success. And then, it was also the song that when we got out on the road and promoted that record, we promoted that single for 6 months, and we played it on every radio station acoustically. We played it on every talk show electrically. We played it at every live show, in-store appearance. That song was the song that both made us, but also I feel like started to break me. And so the song Harder to Breathe became sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was during that time that the pressure was ramping up, and I in particular was really feeling that it was getting harder to breathe, harder and harder to breathe as things ramped up more and more and more. And I carried that with me, through leaving the band, and then, after I left the band, in my years of alcoholism and my anxiety disorder getting to an extreme level. I was having panic attacks on a daily basis. I really was struggling to catch my breath, both literally and figuratively. And so, of course, again, ironically, while the song was the thing that was the answer for us in that stage of our career, the book, Harder to Breathe, was the thing that somehow I knew in my mind was going to be the antidote, this sort of closure. And it was. And so I don't know. I mean, I chose that name, I think, before it even happened.
Yes.
But it was kind of turning that whole thing on its head. Whereas that song, I feel like, kind of broke me. The book kind of was the last chapter of moving on.
And that is so cool because, of course, none of that makes any sense until it's in hindsight, right? Because obviously in hindsight, we can see the journey in new eyes, from a fresh perspective. And yet it has to be lived through in order for it to even have the outcome that it does.
Right.
And so that's so powerful. And I can imagine your coaching and your therapy and your speaking is so healing and inspiring for so many people. So I just love your story, and I'm grateful for you sharing it. What is the number one way, or when I ask you this question, what comes up for you and how you define success for yourself now?
That's a great question. And I ask that question of my clients a lot because some people haven't even thought it through. They're just thinking, I want to be successful, but they don't even know exactly what that means to them. I mean, obviously you love the idea of being rich and famous, but that wasn't really the motivation for me. I had a pretty pure ambition to be an artist, to be somebody that impacted other people in a positive way. Somewhere along the line, of course, when you are in the middle of the thick of world domination, on any level, whatever industry you're in, you can lose sight of that. Even if your idea of what success is was very pure in the beginning, there are a lot of factors that come into play, and some of them are just realistic, about how do we sustain this? How do you build a career and a business that's sustainable? You have to think about the bottom line. You have to think about growing and getting bigger and all that stuff. It's not to negate that. But I've just found that in this part of my life, if the things that I set as goals for me come from a place of purpose, come from the place of, I know that I enjoy being of service and that it's helpful to me as much as it is to other people. If I follow that, it always seems to lead somewhere good. And I'll figure out how to monetize that. I'll figure out how to turn that into a career. But if I'm thinking first the other way, if I'm thinking about how can I make a lot of money? Hey, maybe I can do something to be of service. That doesn't work. You know what I mean? So success, of course, just like anyone else on this planet, I like having comfort and luxuries that are afforded the privileged few. But that is secondary to a life that feels fulfilling. It's easier said than done, but for me, I've been really privileged and blessed to be able to wake up every day and say, what do I feel feels meaningful to me? And that hasn't failed me yet over the last 9 years since I started this whole journey of recovery and then new career.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautifully said. And it's very touching because it's so true that life, I mean, you can chase success, you can chase the things and the money and have the cars and the status and all the stuff, and yet end up feeling really empty. And I know we've all known so many people that feel that way. I got to that point in my life where I checked every box, and then I'm like, and I was self-made. I grew up poor, like with nothing. And all of a sudden I'm in my 30s and I'm like, hey, I've got it all. I did everything society told me that I should do to live a really happy life. But I felt empty on the inside. So then what's it all for, right? Like, where is the meaning in it? And that meaning, when it is derived from your spirit, from your soul, from your heart, and that is what you give to the world, not some pretense that's in your mind, not something you think you need to be, but what is truly and authentically you. When you bring that to life and you offer that from a place of service, the money will find you. Right? Yeah. It will. And by the way, you don't have to have your own business to do it. You can do that in your corporate job. You can do that in the family business. You can do that in your community, but bring that part to life and the alignment comes, right? It does. It takes intentionality, but it definitely comes. And I believe the money follows. And so this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being here. Tell my listeners where is best to find you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have a website, ryandusick.com, and that's kind of a one-stop shop for all the things I'm doing, my therapy, coaching, speaking, the book, the podcast. The Harder to Breathe podcast, you can find that on YouTube. We do the video version and then on all of the audio podcast platforms. At Ryan Michael Dusick is my Instagram handle. I post a lot of fun clips there and promote the show, as well as other stuff, throwback stuff to the band days and my earlier career. So those are kind of the main spots.
I love that. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of new followers from this. So thank you so
I
much
love
for
that.
your time and for sharing your story. It's super inspiring.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.